All of this is playing out as healthcare workers and many political leaders receive the first doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, a hopeful development during a grim week. And it's all as we watch crunch time happen on Capitol Hill tonight, as Congress just passed a few hours ago a continuing resolution keeping the government funded on Friday while lawmakers continue to negotiate over the stimulus bill in the coming days. Sue, you're the congressional correspondent for NPR. Why the so-called CR, the continuing resolution on Friday night, and where does the stimulus negotiation stand?
Yeah, I mean, they really just needed to buy themselves some more time. It flew through Congress. I think they feel like they're really close on a final deal. You know, there's something about this that's both normal and abnormal. It's not unusual at all for Congress to be in this sort of December crunch right before the holidays, high stakes negotiations. We see this year after year after year. What's different about it is I think there is a really broad frustration on Capitol Hill right now among Democrats and Republicans at their own leadership teams. You know, we are here because Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin had been utterly incapable for months and months and months and months to come to a deal on their own. And there has been this sort of uprising of sort of centrists and moderates in the House and Senate that kind of force leadership back to the table. And you hear members across the spectrum saying, there is no way we can go home for Christmas when you're looking at things like unemployment programs that expire at the end of the year that could literally leave millions of Americans completely out of any type of assistance in the middle of this pandemic. So I think the feeling is it'll get done because it has to get done because politically there's no other alternative. But nobody's happy tonight on Capitol Hill. And I think there is some lingering tensions that'll go into the next year over this.
Sue, just a quick follow-up. What is the sticking point, though, for Leader McConnell?
Yeah.
What's holding him up?
You know, they're really close on a lot of things. A lot of times it's the details that kind of need to come together in the end. One thing that they've really got the sticking point in the end is a bunch of Republicans led by Pat Toomey, who's a Republican from Pennsylvania, are trying to get language into the bill that would essentially tie the hands of the Federal Reserve. It would end a couple of emergency lending programs that Congress approved earlier this year to help boost the economy. Toomey says that they should not be reauthorized, that it's not a proper use of the Fed, and that if they want to extend them, they need separate legislation. The Biden administration sees this, and many Democrats on Capitol Hill see this, as trying to tie the hands of the incoming president. And it's a small point. It sounds like a small point, but it's the kind of thing that could really drag this on, especially because I don't think Nancy Pelosi can really blink on this one now that the Biden team is saying, no, it can't be in there.
A small point, but a revealing point. Rachel, 10 years later, the Tea Party conservatives seem to be rearing their head after being pretty quiet during the Trump era. How does this affect the Biden camp as they look ahead to a possible another round of stimulus in 2021?
Yeah, and you know, I was talking to Congressman Jim Clyburn earlier today in an interview, and he said that another relief package is going to be needed at the end of this, regardless of whether or not they pass one now. They see this smaller package as just a stepping stone to getting to a much larger one. The question is how does Biden kind of step in to these negotiations? We've seen President Trump sort of take a little bit of a back seat, right, letting Secretary Mnuchin lead these conversations and these talks on Capitol Hill. There's a big question of if Biden, who has decades of experience on Capitol Hill, tries to step in and play a little bit of a larger role to work this out with Republicans. But we cannot underscore enough that Joe Biden will be taking office at a time when the nation is sharply divided, and lawmakers in Congress are reflecting that divide as well.
Rachel, what was another interesting point you heard from Representative Clyburn? He's such a player in the Biden orbit.
He is, and I asked him directly, especially when we think about Biden's cabinet coming together, the question of whether or not he believes that Biden needs to select a person of color to be his attorney general. That is one pick that we're still waiting to hear from. And he said that you don't necessarily, even after a year that has been enamored in racial tension, a summer of racial unrest, that he doesn't necessarily believe that Biden has to pick someone that is a person of color, and you don't have to be black necessarily to care about black issues. He put it that bluntly. He also talked a little bit about how the inauguration is going to look a lot different this year. I mean, this has been a year that has been overshadowed, of course, by the pandemic. And he told me that for the most part, they're really following the example of the Democratic National Convention that was mostly virtual. So expect a very small amount of people to be gathered there. I'm sure we won't have those ongoing debates about crowd size this time around.
I know. It reminds me in 2013 when I was reporting on the second Obama inauguration, I got to sit behind Katy Perry, the pop star, and John Mayer. I don't think that's going to be happening this time around. Jonathan, we mentioned the vaccine just a few minutes ago. Vice President Pence got vaccinated today at the White House. We didn't see President Trump. Why was that?
Well, I don't have reporting to exactly answer your question, but one suggestion would be that he's had the virus already, and so he said privately, "I think I'm immune." They say I'm immune. He might have even said that publicly. Pence really, for the vice president, wanted to send a message to increase vaccine confidence by having his immunization televised, inviting the networks in, doing it in the morning at a time where there'd be a large national audience. And another thing they're thinking about in a pretty methodical fashion in the administration is how to increase vaccine confidence among communities of color, where we've seen some problems in terms of people not feeling confident about a vaccine. So in that respect, the Surgeon General, who is one of the highest ranking African American officials in the US government, is a really important figure, and he has been leading the outreach to communities of color, trying to put out the message that this is safe, you can trust it, and you can feel confident that the government has done the proper vetting of it.
And Sue, on the vaccine front, just a few minutes ago, Moderna had emergency use approved. What are you hearing on Capitol Hill about the vaccine implementation process?
Well, it's underway. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, both had their first doses today. They both tweeted out pictures of them doing it publicly. I think there was a little bit of hesitancy because I think leadership and members are aware of this idea that they don't want to look like they're getting something before everybody else. But I also think because there's so much skepticism about the vaccine and so many Americans are saying, at least according to polling, that they're not going to take it, that there is a public value here into seeing people in power, people across the political spectrum and ideology getting it in public. And I think that they weigh that sort of political calculation and say it's more important to public health. And quite frankly, members of Congress, whether you like them or don't like them, they need to be vaccinated. The government needs to function. And it has been a really rough year in terms of proxy voting and when they can gather and how they can vote. It has not been a smooth way to run the government. And they are essential workers, even if a lot of people don't look at them that way. So I think that there is going to be an effort to get members of Congress vaccinated. Also, Nancy Pelosi has a really, certain interest in getting everybody vaccinated and back into the Capitol in January because she's going to need every single Democrat healthy and ready to vote for her for Speaker in the first day of the new Congress.
That reminds me of what Mark Shields, our retiring friend of NewsHour, said a couple hours ago. Politicians are still people, even if you don't like them. Rachel, what are you hearing on this important point raised about communities of color and whether they have confidence in the vaccine?
Yeah, and this is such an important point because we know from discrimination in the medical system when it comes to Black Americans in this country, especially that have been disproportionately affected by the virus, that their trust of this vaccine is lower than white Americans, quite frankly. And so you're seeing people like the Surgeon General getting that vaccine, making it clear that it is safe and that it is effective. Here at ABC, we were also talking to many Black Americans out who are on the fence about this, of course, even some that were part of some of those experiments, those medical mistrust experiments from decades ago, families trying to rally behind this and say that they need to get the vaccine because it's the first step to getting over this pandemic, of course. But this administration is trying to take those steps to assure Americans, and of course, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as well. Joe Biden will be receiving the vaccine on Monday.
Jonathan, in a minute, do you expect President Trump to get involved at the 11th hour in the stimulus negotiations or not?
He's been a non-factor in them, really. I mean, he's made a few comments behind the scenes that he wants larger stimulus checks, but really, to the extent that he was intensely interested in the stimulus package, he wanted a huge package to go out before the election to help him get re-elected. And in fact, the resistance he ran into was from the Republican Senate. Trump wanted a bigger deal than Pelosi before the election. He had no concerns about adding to the debt and deficit. He just wanted to send a fire hose of cash out into the electorate in the hope that it could get him some votes. So he hasn't been engaged. I don't expect he will be. But, you know, I'm sort of done making predictions about Donald Trump. He'll probably prove me wrong in 24 hours.
Well, Jonathan, your reporting is usually always dead on, so we'll keep following you.